What? Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I said before, just succumbing to the pessimism is not the way to go here. But when you list like these different measures that we could take and the administration wanted to take at the beginning of the year, we're really far from that. I guess and it's hard to see the reset, right? Like we've moved to this point. We've talked a lot about the national policy and the coordinatedness. It has, much of this has been given off to the state, like the public health agencies. I mean, they're the boots on the ground. So it makes sense that they're making decisions. As you've been studying the public health response, are there communities, are there states that are doing it right? Both in terms of the reset and because sometimes I think that's one of the strengths of the United States is we can have, experiments going in different parts of the country. And then that lets us learn, hey, look, they've got it figured out. Let's go there. Like in terms of let's adopt that model. So where are the success stories?
I would say, like, we see from tracking state policies, when the federal government provides guidance, we see all of these states shift their policies. So everybody will say, well, but Florida will never implement a mask policy. Sure, but 43 states did. Like that's a lot of people who are having reduced COVID spread, millions of fewer illnesses, as well as tens of thousands, if not more, fewer deaths. So it makes an enormous difference to have federal guidance, and nothing comes close. And I have been really disappointed to see that even in the midst of huge and deadly surges, the governor of Vermont is pointing to guidance from science not to implement mask policies. And I think that shows us what we do need: a complete 180. We need a public health response to a public health disaster, and it needs to be led by people who are from the communities that are most affected as well. It needs to be a diverse team. To see Biden and his picture of the people who were in the room with him as he was coming up with his plan for Omicron just conveyed how much better we need to do. So I think and just to see the results, right? 185,000 people have died, preventable deaths of Delta, even before the current surge takes its toll. And so, I think the data are in on this, on how well this approach is going and how miserable it's making everybody. And time for a complete reset. We were ranked #1 in public health preparedness. We know, we have experts who know what to do. We are not doing it. And for your examples of states that are doing it, I think the governors that have done it are I have so much admiration for them, because they had to do it without the support of the federal government. And those states are Washington, Illinois, Oregon, Hawaii kept its mask policy the entire time. Nevada, New Mexico, and Washington, D.C. until recently, when they took away their mask policy. So I've been sharing Nevada's policy a lot, because I think it's a practical approach. Given that we hear that people don't want to wear masks forever, I think we can have a very reasonable policy that says wear them when transmission is high, because we realize that high transmission alone does have several negative consequences. And we still have a lot to learn about the virus and what it does long-term, and what repeated infection does. And so that policy turns on and off by county, but based on local transmission. So it will automatically turn off. If there's a new surge, it automatically turns on. And that is a really smart long-term approach for managing the pandemic. And, say that we get to a better place where there is only a new variant every 5 or 10 years, but there's a bad year. We want those mask policies to turn on automatically and not have to go through the political process. It's really, it's hard to know when a surge is coming. I was writing about, like, we might see a winter surge in Massachusetts until the next week, when there was a surge in Massachusetts. And then I was reading there's sort of a surge. And 3 weeks later, I'm saying, well, hospitalizations have increased 250%. It happens fast, and we need to be prepared, and we need just like a logical, rational approach with strong leadership. And so that is the most important thing we can do. I think also, you know, like talking about strong leaders and like why I started to share my voice, like you changed the discourse on federal policy and how to address the economic disaster. And you were an example to me about speaking up. And I think that I really appreciate that you encouraged me to do so. I think it's an important time to do so. And this disaster is bigger than any one of us. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than my career. It's more important to contribute to doing better as soon as possible than it is for anything, you know, in my own trajectory. And so I thought, you know, like if I'm going to have a public health career, what could be more important than trying to prevent tens of thousands of deaths in the next few weeks? And so I wanted to use my voice to do that. I am so grateful that more and more people are using their voices to do that. I'm also so grateful for the people working with community organizations. Everybody can play a role. My students are, you know, texting their friends groups when they get boosted to let them know they should go get boosted. My colleagues and I were flying neighborhoods, and we're working with Project N95 to deliver free masks to essential workers and the communities that are hardest hit. So like, if you see that you can help, and this is a time when we need help. If you're in the field and you have the privilege of being part of the conversations, if you're in the government and you have the privilege of being in the conversations, this is an unprecedented time when it is important to speak up and try to help.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. To go back to an earlier point you made about the tying the mask mandate to transmission, it reminds me a lot of automatic stabilizers, right? So this has been an effort that I and other economists have pointed to, like when you get relief, when you send out the checks, let it be about the labor market conditions. Don't have it be about politics and the timing and the amounts and when they turn on and off. And there are some basic things that we do in every recession, like sending out money, getting the unemployment benefits. There are basic things we would do in any pandemic, putting the masks on, getting the, you know, community access to vaccines or whatever the treatments are. Like you should know, like you should let conditions that no one controls, right? Like no politician can decide the unemployment rate. No politician can decide what COVID is or how it transmits, but we can respond to it and have a plan ahead of time that you have also a meeting of the minds of the researchers, the community groups, like you can work out the details and do like what you said, make sure that you have a broad-based group of people contributing to the conversation. And that, you know, if there's any thin silver lining in how the policy discussion has evolved, I do think there has been, like, you're not alone in saying, this is the moment. I have expertise, I'm going to contribute it. I know I've learned a lot, even within the economic policy space, with people who don't, like, it's policy, but they don't have the econ PhD, right? I did a lot of work on unemployment insurance. I learned so much from people who actually know the program, not like how it's supposed to look in the economic models and it gets all the people. They know where it's broken, how it doesn't work, how it could work, like know the solutions. And then I had the opportunity, as I became more engaged publicly, talking about, you know, this program is important, here's how we could fix it. I wrote about it in opinion pieces, I talked about it on Twitter. Over time, I had people who were struggling with unemployment come talk to me privately. So like I was getting the whole range of like kind of the theory of why this is important as a safety net, which I knew, the reality of what the system is, and then the personal experience of what it's like trying to navigate it. So those are things that if I had not wandered out into the world and started to try and engage, like I wouldn't have appreciated all those perspectives. So And then,
Yeah, I love that point, and I love, that I was working on unemployment insurance, and so, like working in that different space may have informed my work in the COVID policy space. And I think it really speaks to how working together and across disciplines, and also like part of humility is recognizing like academics were homogenous. That is even more true in the economics field, right? People who are academics tend to earn a high income and live in high income communities. We are more white, and we are more likely to come from high income backgrounds. And we have to hold on to that, and we need to explicitly work with people who have different lived experiences. We also need to bring into our fields diverse people who can bring a completely different perspective to researching unemployment insurance and SNAP, and have that lived experience to be able to ask different questions in different ways than we do. And I think we should be working with union leaders. We should be working with immigrant groups. We should be working with the people who are most affected by COVID and most affected by the economic conditions. And I think that we should do more of all coming together. So I hope in a way that this will be more of that. I think that I've been really sad to see economics and public health butt heads a lot, and say, stay out of my lane. We're in an unprecedented societal disaster, and we all have to work through it together. And so actually the entire solution to this, to the public good of having air free of COVID, is for everybody to come together, for experts to come together, with the people who are leaders from the communities who are most affected by the disaster, and for us to pass policies that bring people together and doing the most important things to overcome it. And the sooner we start managing it really well and taking it really seriously, the sooner we can get to a better situation. If we can have vaccine mandates, and if we have to get vaccinated every 4 months, let's get started. Let's live in a better world where we're not losing parents, where we are able to be around each other more safely, where we don't need mask policies as often, but we may still need them because maybe we have a vaccine evading variant come along, or we have a partially vaccine evading variant here. I think let's come together on like putting into place like real management and real leadership, explaining to people why is it that we need to do this, what is happening, how is it affecting people's lives, and how do we have a vision for doing better. And President Biden has had that vision. He has the people who can do it, because they wrote this work of art pandemic plan. We don't need a new pandemic plan. Everything we need to do is in there. We need someone who will lead us in implementing that pandemic plan as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I do take some comfort in the administration trying to push through a vaccine mandate. I know that's been kind of a stop and start and delaying it in the year, but that's an example of the federal government taking a step that is not popular, but has science behind it. There's more, right? The mask mandates, and which, so I guess just showing that it can be done, right? Like we have to kind of. I'm really glad they're doing that.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, this has been an excellent conversation, wide ranging. I have a lot, but the last question that I wanted to ask you, because hopefully you have inspired others to jump in, get out of the safe space sometimes, or the comfortable space of academia. Like you have all this knowledge, get out there and apply it. What is something that you, having all that's happened in the last 2 years, as you've, gone from research to more policy engagement, like, what would you tell Julia back at the beginning, right? What's something you've learned that was advice you would have found useful, and then I think is useful advice to people who are thinking about moving the spaces that you have? Like, what's the lesson? You talked about humility. I know that's a big one, and I agree, but is there something else that you've learned the hard way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think absolutely I would have done more to communicate from the beginning. I would have done more to not just to be reactive to a very bad policy decision, but to to speak up when I saw misinformation out there in the first place. I've learned, like, from Hakeem Jefferson's article in the New York Times, right? Like, backlash is common. There was backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement that he documented that was also largely through headlines, the headlines shifting from racial injustice to discussing riots and, using more charged language. I think we should, I think a lot of it is recognizing that there is this element that is organized, that is doing that. And again, the best way we confront that is, like, that's a very small proportion of the population that has taken over a very large proportion of headlines. I would say the same, like, handful of people are quoted still in like 60%, if not more, of articles on COVID in the New York Times and in the Washington Post. In our leading national and international newspapers, and I think we need, and then then it started to be that they weren't the only person quoted. I would also get quoted, so I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to be quoted alongside them. But I wish there were more people in there too. I wish that, and I don't think we're going to change journalism in a day. I think this is important for journalists to be aware of, so that they find accurate sources and they don't go to the same person 25 times. But I think also other people speaking up, having as many people, having more people speaking up for what most people think. 95% of epidemiologists, we were surveyed immediately before the mask guidance change. 95% of us thought we needed masks for 6 months or more, even before the Delta variant came. That really shows what a consensus there was, and how it was a very small minority writing those headlines. And they wrote the off-ramp headlines, and they changed policy with the off-ramp headlines. And I also wish that, there would be some accountability. I wish that the people who wrote the off-ramp headlines would write some new headlines and say, we were wrong about the pandemic ending. And, we all need to have more humility about it. And mask policies would be a big help right now. I think again, that's privilege, right? Like, people writing the headlines were from privileged communities, with high vaccination rates, with low COVID transmission rates, partly because of mask policies. And I understand that they didn't want their kids to have to wear masks. And that's, like, where the data-driven idea can work really well, that, like, if they can get it really under control, then it's okay to take off masks more. But they shouldn't be writing off-ramps headlines when most of the country is in very different circumstances, and kids are going to lose parents because policies were changed. So, the stakes are high. I think people think it's just a Twitter battle, or they're just in it for their, for their building their career. And we have to recognize that what we do now is very consequential. And so I hope people will join in sharing their voice. It's also a hard, like, anybody who's not, I understand it. It's hard. Most of my colleagues, like, most of my students, like, everybody's overwhelmed. It's hard to do anything, but for anybody who is following along and sees that things are wrong, I appreciate that that some people are starting to speak up. I think there's never been a more important time for it.
Well, great. Those are perfect words to end with. And I truly appreciate all that you've shared today about what we need to do, and how those of us that have experts and platforms can widen the range of voices, and hope is not lost. We can, shift and do better. So, and we must, right? So.
Yeah, and I hopefully this is just the start of more discourse between public health, economics, and, like, essential workers and people in leading community organizations in low-income neighborhoods, working to help with COVID and food insecurity right now, which is going back up. Hopefully it's just the start, and we can come together and do better. I'm happy to see, like, some signs of change and that people are, the narrative's changing too slowly for my preference, but the early results suggest that it can make a difference. And the more and louder we do it, the faster maybe we can make a difference, and it will help more kids grow up with their parents.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for leading the way, and I look forward to seeing the video.